Get ready for more taxes, European style. Talk about that today on the Gary DeMar Show. Hello and welcome to the Gary DeMar Show. Once again, I'm your host, Joel McDermott. For today, I want to talk about an article that was published on Bloomberg.com and has got some reciprocation around the net in different ways, particularly relating to the deficit and Social Security and possible taxation recommended for the future. The article was written by David Millenberg. It is entitled, "Bowles Says Deficits Will Make U.S. Second Rate." The real issue being talked about here is the deficit caused by Social Security. And Erskine Bowles, who's co-chairman of the commission set up by President Obama for U.S. deficit reduction, which was set up last month, about the same time Obama was putting his budget forth for the greatest deficit in U.S. history, he set up the Commission for the U.S. Deficit Reduction. Brilliant. And put this man at the top of it. Erskine Bowles, he was a former chief of staff for President Clinton, also served on the Small Business Administration. This guy is a Washington insider for a long time on the left. He has come out and said all of our revenue is completely consumed by entitlements, by which he means Social Security, Medicare, and Medicaid. This is today, not some forecast into the future. Every dollar we spend, therefore, on the military, homeland security, transportation, education, and research is borrowed. And of course, half of that comes from foreign sources. This is a recipe for disaster, he says. Well, and his commission has until December 1st to reduce the deficit to 3% of the economy by the year 2015, and they have to provide recommendations by December 1st. So they're putting their ideas out there in the public, and here's his idea. A value-added tax ought to be something that's on the table. We're going to have to make some very tough decisions, and we aren't going to come out of this very popular. What is a value-added tax? Well, it is very popular for socialist governments, for governments who like high taxation rates, and in fact it is originated in France in the 1950s and is now implemented over most of Europe. It is a tax on goods. It is essentially a sales tax throughout the process of the production of goods. For example, a raw materials guy sells his raw materials to a manufacturer. The manufacturer, in that scenario, has to pay taxes at the government value-added tax rate. Anytime allegedly value is added to a product, the tax has to go to the government. When the manufacturer sells to the wholesaler, there's a tax there. When the wholesaler sells to the retailer, there's a tax. And of course, when the retailer sells to the consumer, the tax is applied once again. And there's a whole scheme of cascading payments that go down to cover. Of course, what's going to happen is the person who has to pay taxes down the line is going to raise his cost to cover that tax for the next guy, and it gets passed on eventually to the consumer. Now, in most scenarios, this is talked about as if it were simply a replacement for a sales tax, in which case it would only benefit the government in two ways. Number one, they would start getting money earlier because the first guys have to start paying taxes and still waiting, instead of waiting till the very end of the sale in the process. And it would impose a rigorous series of accounting between people, as each of them has an incentive to recover their tax they have to pay from the next guy, and therefore more tax, I guess, more loopholes get closed in the process for the government. There is another, there is one more benefit to the government I'll get to in a minute, which is the biggest one. But here's the problem. If you're just going to replace the sales tax with that, you don't really gain a lot in the big picture. So what these guys are actually talking about is putting value-added taxes in place along with all of our other taxes, which of course is going to drive the price of goods up by whatever cost of that tax is for the consumer in the end. So prices are going to go up, long story short. What is the other hidden agenda here? It's the fact that it makes it very easy for the government to raise taxes in a way that is not directly visible or discussed in public to the consumers. You don't have to argue over raising the sales tax. You don't have to have a referendum in your state over raising the sales tax. The government can just do this kind of behind closed doors the way they do most other things. Taxes go up, prices rise, and the people are stuck paying the taxes. Governments love this thing. When it was first instituted in Denmark, for example, the value-added tax was 9.2%. That was 1962. Over the years, it has gradually increased, and today the value-added tax is right around 25 plus or minus % of all goods and transactions throughout the process in Denmark. You can see how it is basically a tool for the government to hide taxation from the end consumer. And that's exactly the way it's played out over the years. These guys want to implement this in the United States as a means of reducing the deficit. And of course, it's not just the liberals. What is really scary about this is that at least one conservative, or I should say neoconservative, has come out and said this is what we're going to have to do in order to get our deficits down. Gregory Mankiw, I don't know how to pronounce his name, but he was a former chairman for George Bush's Council of Economic Advisors in conjunction with a few other folks, has recently written an article, and this is discussed by an article another guy's written for Reason online, The Wrong Policy at the Wrong Time. And they discuss the fallacy of the value-added tax. This is being pushed, of course, because we don't want to become like Greece, they say. Greece is over there with their deficit problems, and they're trying to get funding and selling bonds to other countries through private means, and the markets are about to crash because Greece is going to go under, and they're saying, oh, well, this could happen in the United States too, so we need to implement this tax policy sooner rather than later in order to stave off these kind of problems in the future. And of course, what this guy points out, one of the fallacies of that is the fact that Greece itself already had a 19% value-added tax in place. It was a joke. It didn't save anything. The second fallacy of it is this. There's nothing that says that once the government collects that money, that it will go to pay down the deficits. A good example of that is in our own nation. President Obama's first budget for last year included $600 billion of revenue from a fictional tax that didn't exist, which was the cap and trade. It was assuming it would get passed and they'd be able to collect the money. And, well, of course it didn't get passed, but he assumed that money. And in that first budget, that $600 billion was being used to pay down the deficit. Well, guess what? Obama's budget for this year assumes the same $600 billion, but it has already moved from being used to pay off the deficit to being paid to pay for all kinds of entitlements and other government spending programs. So you can see these guys can't even manage fictional money. What do you think they're going to do when they get their hands on the real money? Of course, they're going to spend it on whatever they want. They don't care about the deficits. They care about getting reelected, which is why the two guys that are speaking out in favor of the value-added tax so far for this current discussion, it is interesting that neither of them are elected officials. Both of them, well, one of them is a former appointed official, the other one is a currently appointed official, but they don't have to face elections in the fall. And in fact, the report that is due on December 1st was purposely set on December 1st in order to miss the elections that are coming this November. So in other words, elected officials will not have to deal with the deficit issue and the issue of more taxation before the elections take place. That's the issue. These guys are planning, hoping for European-style government, taxation. Call your senator, tell them no. Thank you for joining us on the Gary DeMar Show today.
For more related to today's topic, check out Protecting Your Wealth from Liberal Fallacies, featuring Joel McDermott. You will find it at AmericanVision.com.